Michael Irons and the Great Continent by Nathan Moore. Chapter 4 Death in Black, Death in White. No matter where Michael Irons found himself, there was ever evil to confront. Strangely, and for no reason he could articulate, the persistent and ubiquitous nature of evil inspired Irons and drove him forward with cold and constant purpose, as if he hoped to match with stoic indifference the very entropy he fought, rather than be reduced to cynicism and despair. Perhaps this natural resilience was what allowed him to so zealously persist in his pursuit of wickedness, even when confronted with the most creative horrors visited upon and inflicted by mankind. Before Michael Irons now was an all too common thing. Wanton destruction and death visited upon peasant farmers, their home burned, everything of value taken, all slain, and worse done to the most vulnerable. The fetid smell of charred flesh, dampened and engorged by the morning dew, elicited from his dark and distant mind memories of battlefields, war, and things more damnable still. Yet, in this particular instance, there was something unforeseen to give Irons pause. A figure in white stood ahead, also inspecting the gruesome scene. Despite the near-tropical climate, the man was heavily clothed, his broad physique all but swaddled in white robes and garments, tall form hidden entirely. On his back was slung a great falchion of Eastern make, the lavishly engraved blade wide and curved, dark with dry blood, and ample enough to beg a two-handed grip, in this way rather alike the great English longsword Irons possessed. The figure, seeming to sense he was not alone, turned his white shrouded head, revealing a simple white mask, its center seeming to crease and angle down like a beak, the eyes narrow and angled so there was not even a gleam within. The cloth of his robes was unstained, bearing no trace of blood or soot, prompting Irons to conclude this person was not one of the murderous perpetrators. A comrade in purpose, perhaps, and he imagined the blood-crusted weapon the other bore inferred a potential unity in vengeance at least. Idle hand resting on the butt of one of his flintlock pistols, Irons approached. The figure continued to watch as he drew near, avian-inspired mask obscuring his thoughts, but the posture presented did not shift towards defense or evidence ill intent. Irons removed his hand from his weapon and made a bow. The figure slowly returned a more abbreviated version, which Irons chalked up to stoic despondence, understandable in the face of the still smoldering massacre. The white-clad figure then returned to his silent survey of the ruined farm, seeming to Irons as if he were at a loss. Upon the start of his own evaluation, Irons noticed a gleam near his black muddy boots emanating from a shallow, water-filled boot print. Squatting down to fish out the object, Irons found it to be an intricate golden decoration. He frowned at it, confused, for this humble farm was the last place he would have imagined to find even porcelain, let alone gold. And he began to wonder if the armed man in white's presence was not so unusual. Irons stood and spoke to the man in white, his will to do this allowing the words to be understood, just as the old man had promised. "Do we hunt the same quarry?" Irons inquired. Now the masked face turned toward him with noticeable rapidity. Behind the mask, the eyes must have been wide, for there was a brief reflective gleam therein. "You speak. No, I understand," came the voice from behind the bird mask. "I understand your words." The male voice was, at first blush, heroic and youthful. "A wise man empowered me to be understood," Irons allowed succinctly. The white-clad man, voice indicating he remained unconvinced or was otherwise taken aback, offered a distracted answer. "I seek the ones who have slain my intended." This memory seemed to refocus his faculties, and he continued with grim conviction. "They deserve a gruesome death 10 times over, and while my vengeful efforts shall suffice no one but I, death they shall receive. Then we are in accord. And Michael Irons held up the gold jewelry he had found. I have some mean capability in tracking. Come, allow me to aid your vengeance. The two cloaked shadows, one black and one white, pursued their joint quarry in silence and at speed throughout the day and into the night without rest. Face hidden by the mask and as taciturn as Irons, the man in white allowed Irons no further insight to his person, while the strange man's capabilities spoke volumes. He maintained tireless pace with Irons in similar grim silence, not even producing the sound of labored breaths against his mask. This prodigious ability juxtaposed against the specific deficiencies typified of modern city living intrigued Irons, but he kept these notions to himself. The clear moonlit night was ideal for Irons. Within the forest-shrouded stronghold of the murderous bandit mob, great fires were lit and numerous torches danced. The bright lights would incline eyes to copious illumination, plunging the forest beyond the walls into unnatural darkness. Only the bandits on watch, their eyes undazzled, were of some concern to Irons, for they were likely the stronghold's only ready archers. And to the man in white he silently pointed out the guarded towers and wall patrols. You mentioned vengeance, Irons remarked quietly, the thick forest necessitating they draw within a stone's throw from the stronghold for adequate scouting. If honor demands from you certain action, pray, tell me. The bird-like mask seemed to weigh his words for a moment. Were the entire stronghold to burn with no resistance, I would consider this acceptable, the youthful voice allowed. But were I allowed selfishness, and honor was observed, then I would desire single combat with their warlord. The white mask turned to Irons, and within a sliver of moonlight that found its way through the forest, an eye burned with deep savagery, and this kindled within Irons memories of youth. He considered the potential ends posed, and proposed a notion of his own. The raucous revelry within the stronghold was that of a war party returned victorious. Feasting and drink and music were all aplenty, but even this, while bordering on frenzied, was simple crescendo. Tomorrow they would sally forth with their ill-gotten gains and begin celebration in earnest, with all the murderous debauchery such base and wicked persons deigned to inflict. Their warlord, tall and charismatic, wrists and ears adorned with gold, drank and feasted little, his mind preoccupied with quiet fears of drink-inspired assassination attempts. So he jostled with laughter in his bone-wrought, throne-like chair, carousing with his men in a manner more drunken than he was. Then he heard a name called, his name, his real name, known to no one he knew to be alive, shouted with an unbridled hatred he had only once heard in all his blood-soaked years. It sounded no different now. He stood, numbly and without thought, the sounds of celebration ceasing with sudden abruptness. Through the flames of the bonfire before him, the warlord could see the torch-lit road beyond the stronghold's gate, silhouetting a statuesque figure cloaked in white. The two guards meant to watch there lay in the pale illumination like broken dolls. 3 bandits charged, swords raised and voices shrieking battle cries, none considering how an alert had not been called from the walls, or why no arrows flew toward the intruder. With a great step forward, the figure in white drew his sword, came within distance, and struck in a wide, singular sweep, cleaving through 3 necks and 3 upraised sword arms. The warlord had crossed around the fire, disbelieving, and while the face was obscured by the mask of a phoenix and the body wrapped in white, the proportions, the voice, and that great brutal sword removed from him all doubt, into the absence of which crept a deep and profound fear. A final strand of external consideration strayed before the warlord, and he looked up and around to the walls and towers of his stronghold. All torches there were extinguished, and no movement was seen. And, as he glanced at the fearful faces around him, somehow there seemed fewer bandits than there ought to be. The light on the road he thought to be from torches had only grown, and the gate and the wooden walls of the stronghold in their entirety were shortly wreathed in flame, and those who tried to fling water at the flames were surreptitiously felled by arrows. And when two attempted escape, they were abruptly cut down, the sound of flintlocks coming from the darkness upon the walls. The warlord drew his sword, the motion numb, and turned to the Phoenix masked man. After all these years, death had come at last.